Yes, so if you like what happens today, you can thank Laura. If you don't like what happens today, you can pull Laura aside and say, don't do that again. Laura. What she sang, it's a work of art. Music to me is far more effective than anything that I could ever say. And I think one of the greatest vessels or instruments of that divine design through the artistry of music is Laura. And you ever love somebody so much that when you know they're going to be there, you just relax? Like knowing Laura was going to be here, I was just like, oh, it doesn't even matter what I say, Laura's here. So I love you. So a couple of months ago, I signed up for a Tai Chi class, specifically designed to people for a certain age, in late 60s and 70s. And so I don't know, I just felt drawn to go and take an experimental class. And as is my nature, who do I pick as an instructor but two identical twins who are martial arts experts, combat, taekwondo, black belts. They teach and have taught extensively. They start young all the way to adults. And so these two identical twins, I'm like, who's talking? They work in tandem. And in last week's class, they said that their father had been a drill sergeant in the military. And so one of the things that they remember vividly from their childhood was this from their father's mouth: repetition, repetition, repetition. And I thought about that because that's exactly what I'm involved in right now, in learning the 24 moves and having them constantly adjust me in my practice. But I thought, how universal? Repetition, repetition, repetition. And most of that repetition, I think, when we talk about it in those terms, is a conscious choice of learning something. It's a programming in order to expand our quality of life. But what we also know from a spiritual context is that there's another kind of repetition that takes place, and that would happen to reside within what we call mind. Years ago, when I was leading the center in Atlanta, I came upon this fun little book, and it was called E Squared by Pam Grout. Any of you heard of this book? We used to do summer book clubs, and I thought this would be an excellent summer book club because it was experiments. Like you could teach, and E Squared stood for energy squared, and it was how you as an individual could take the divine energy and experiment and bring practical application in order to have some fun and to create a lightness with the power that is within us. And she designed this book beautifully for that. But early in the book, she said something that made me really think. She said, we think 60,000 thoughts a day. And I thought, who counted? Like, how did they count? Was somebody like wired and they had a little thing and went, you know? But 60,000 thoughts a day. But here's what really got me. She said, of those 60,000 thoughts, hardly any of them are new. They are repetitive thoughts. That's the other kind of repetition. They are what you might say the regurgitation of events and stories and belief systems and all of the other things that have saturated us in our domestication as human beings. Imagine 60,000 thoughts a day. Very few of them are new. They're just revisited over and over again. And so that really got me to thinking about what constitutes a fresh thought or a new thought. And that's where repetition, repetition, repetition takes on a whole different lens, because that is something that we are invited to do when we can even begin to scratch the surface in understanding who and what we are. So I'm in this space right now in my life where I've been on this spiritual journey for quite a while. If you come to the movie, you will see that Louise Hay was my spiritual mama. And I traveled with her in the early days. I was a part of a trio called Alliance. The joke was we were the original New Thought boy band. Put that on your resume. But we sang I Love Myself the Way That I Am, which was Louise's signature song. And most of our repertoire was written to align with Louise's teaching. And she took us on the road with her. And she was very kind to include us as things began to expand and grow. And she started to get all this notoriety and became the icon that she was. So it was quite a learning lesson for me, going from dipping my toe into what is this to this full-on, baptism, if you will, baptism by fire, of watching the way that not only she was implementing her own internal structure and lessons, but being with other people who were navigating their story as well. And so I just observed. I became a minister because of her, because she had been a religious science minister. She really poked the intellectual learner in me, told me I should take these classes, and one thing led to another, and I kind of followed that path alongside of her. And what I was learning in my time with her was to begin to notice those repetitive thoughts. So growing up poor, the whole stereotypical story of abuse and all that kind of stuff, was something that even though you can remove yourself physically from that, it doesn't mean that mentally you've removed yourself from that. It's very much in there in terms of what we think we are and who we are and how we navigate and the way in which we, protect ourselves and do all of the kinds of preparatory things in order to move through society and in this human, what I call this costume. And I was an actor, and I was on a road trip with Louise at the same time that I was up for one of the biggest roles of my life. It was between me and another person. And I could not stop obsessing about this because this whole thing would have completely changed my life. And that was back in the day when you had to call your agent on the phone because they didn't have cell phones. And so the running joke was I was always telling the driver, could you pull over? I need to call my agent. So even at breakfast, they'd go, do you need to call your agent? Do you need to call your agent? And so I think we were in like Bartlesville, Oklahoma, somewhere around there in the Tulsa area. And I go, can you pull over? I need to call my agent. And I did. And on the side of a road at a payphone, I learned that it went to the other person. And I got back onto the van, and I had me a good old-fashioned pity party. And you will see this little excerpt in me mention this in the film, but she was very tolerant up to a point. And Louise used to have these beautiful fingernails. They're just beautifully manicured fingernails. And I remember she finally stopped me, and she dug her fingernail in my leg because I was sitting right next to her. The mark is still there. But basically, she stopped me, and she just said this, need I remind you that you need to honor the entirety of your journey? And in my 20s, that tells you how long ago that was, it went over my head. But it's been fascinating how her words and her legacy and her tutelage and her mothering for me continues to evolve inside of me. And when I think now about those words of honoring the entirety of your journey, I think about that now in what I believe is the greatest gift that you and I have been given. And by the way, congratulations for being willing to accept the gift. You came into a human body to accept the greatest gift. Do you know what the gift is? The gift of paradox. The ability to hold two things at once. When Jesus the Christ said, be in the world, he was saying, you need to be in your costume. I imagine he put his hands on his hips like that and said, you need to be in your costume. You need to ride that train all the way. You need to explore what your passions are. You do not deny the self, the small s self, the relative sense of you, the finite self, because it's here for a reason. Do not shelve that. Do not misuse that. Honor that. And at the same time. And I think that this is the trick. This is the dance. Can you hold two things at once? Can you honor the relative, the costume that you and I have been given, the uniqueness of what it is that we are? Can you go explore your somebodyness until all of the somebodyness has been drunken, whatever the word is? And then discover that when you have exhausted that route, and don't be premature about that journey, when you finally feel like you're coming to the end of that, you start to embrace the absolute part of you, which is the nobodiness, or letting all of those titles and all of those stories and all of those things begin to dissolve. And then you start to see how we are everybody, or all things. And prematurely, what happens sometimes on the spiritual path is we want to dismiss the relative. But what I love and what I continue to learn and what I continue to teach is they work in tandem together. You can't have the relative without the absolute, the God self, and you can't have the God self without the costume for it to be able to be exemplified and lived through. And so in this journey, the repetition then now is a whole new game. And the repetition is, can you remember your absolute nature? Can you remember that? And it's difficult in a human realm world where everything is built upon dualism, yin yang. And the fact that you said yes to come and play in this realm of dualism. You came from the infinite into a finite being. And the whole game is, hey, when will you remember? When will you and I shake ourselves from the sleep? Shaking the sleeping self becomes the course, the curriculum that you and I have each agreed to do. When will that happen? And I've noticed that it doesn't necessarily wait and happen for those of a certain age in their elders' wisdom. I've met very, very, very young people who have somehow remembered and taken ownership of their absolute nature and honoring their relative, and I bow at their feet because they are so brilliant beings. So there's no one size fits all. There's no template. The only objective is, and this is what I want you to hear, the only objective is, are you willing to remember who you are? And how do we do that? What is the repetition and the repetition that we begin to dissolve ourselves? So I have this nonprofit, Kaleidoscope Child Foundation. My right arm is here in my foundation. She's on my board. I'm calling her out. She's probably so embarrassed she didn't even see that I was here. She's here from Atlanta, Nikki. So she knows how maddening it is. Yeah, she's right behind you. Yeah, you can touch her. She's very holy. But we've been running this thing now. We're actually in our 24th year. And after COVID, like everybody else, we were figuring, what are we going to do? How are we going to generate income? How are we going to keep our doors open? How are we going to keep program happening? And I thought, you need to shake it, David. You need to find something big. And I thought, I know, I'm going to walk the Camino again. So when I turned 50, I walked the traditional route of the Camino to Santiago de Compostela, and I did the France route, where you go over the Pyrenees. So the second one, I thought, I'm going to do the Portuguese route. I'm going to start in Lisbon, walk all across Portugal, and then go into Spain. And I'm going to use that as a fundraiser. I'm going to take my little phone, I'm going to make these videos, and I'm going to make people aware of our work that we do in the world. And on the Portugal route, they had these things called variants, where if you looked at the little map, it said, if you go this way for 2 or 3 days, you'll see this, and it'll put you back, or you can stay in this monastery, or you can do these things. And one of them said, this will take you to Fatima. Now, I was not raised Catholic. I was raised First Assemblies of God in Beaumont, Texas. Hallelujah. And escaped as soon as I could. And so I didn't really know much about Fatima, but I was intrigued by the story of the apparition of Mary appearing to these 3 children. And supposedly, Fatima was supposed to be like Oz, or the Mecca of where this event actually took place. And in the Marian tradition, this is the most famous cathedral in the world. And I was like, something is saying go there. So I decided to take this variant. Just like it is right now, 4 years ago in Portugal, the temperatures were over 100 degrees every day. And I was soaking wet, had my little shorts on and my little boots and my little backpack. And I finally entered into Oz, or Fatima. And it was like, instead of green, it was white. Just beautiful white spires. I didn't know where to go. There were thousands of people. But the thing that caught my attention the most was right as you entered, they had this long strip of indoor-outdoor carpet. I mean, super, super long. And that is what people were crawling on their knees to. So they would start way back here, and they would do this penance crawl for their sins and their absolution. And this thing went on forever. And I just remember going, oh my God. There was a little judgment. I was like, thank God I'm not that. Thank God my path, whatever was, the fun little judgments were going off in my mind. But I was also astonished at the level of devotion and repetition of how many cycles they were having to do, I guess depending upon whatever their worries or circumstances were. But I finally found a little side chapel. And a couple of days before I got there, I had put a notice on Facebook. And I said, hey, I'm going to go to Fatima. Would you like me to take something, a prayer request, anything that's heavy on your heart? I don't know what to expect when I get there, but if you would like me to do that, I will know the right and perfect place, and I will offer all of that up in prayer for all of us. I got over 200 requests on Facebook. And I finally found this place. It was this white chapel. There was no religious iconography in it at all. It was pure white, the kind that made your eyes burn. And there was just one painting. And it was sort of this Art Nouveau, Greco-looking painting of Mary and the children, but it was done in this abstract style, and the colors were silver and gold, and as the light was shining on it, it seemed like it was alive. And I sat there and I went, this is the place. And I got out my phone. And I began to scan through all of these requests, and all of a sudden it was as if the painting came alive and it said, put your phone down. And it said, basically it called me out for the judgment that I had on the people who were crawling on their knees outside. It's like, oh, you think you're separate from them, or perhaps more spiritually advanced than them. And, I'm a little unnerved by this sudden communication from a painting. But as I sat there, I was like very attentive, and I was like, oh, yeah, there was judgment in there. And then it said, now read all of those things on Facebook again on your phone. And you know what? Every request had the same energy as the people who were crawling on their knees towards some solution outside of themselves. Every prayer request, everything that weighed heavy upon those individuals carried the same energy. Do you understand what I mean? Meaning that the solution was felt to be outside of themselves, or that they wanted the circumstance that they were in to be fixed or changed or different. And there really is a similarity if you can sit with that for a moment and realize just because one is being exemplified by crawling on your knees doesn't mean that the other one in mind is saying, I don't like this and I want this fixed. My point is, when you start to understand the immensity of the gift that you and I have as relative and absolute, then, as they say in Buddhism, there's neither a grabbing at or a pushing away. A grabbing at or a pushing away. If I'm grabbing at something that I feel that I don't have, then the part of mine says, you believe that you don't have this, therefore there will be an amplification of proof, because that's just the way the lawfulness of this reciprocity works. If I'm trying to push something away, it means that this is something that I feel is separate or ominous or defeatist, and that's why in Buddhism they call it the middle path, neither grabbing at or pushing away. And this is where the advanced thing comes, because when we have a physical body, when we live in this realm of duality, of inequality, of inhumanity, and all of the other things that are going on inside of them, spiritual mastery is not to turn your back on that, but can you walk in that equanimity in the midst of that without matching the energy of the thing that you're condemning with the same kind of energy that is in here. That's why when Mother Teresa, the mythological story, if it may be true, I don't know, when they said, would you come to this, this march against war? And she said, no, but I will come for something that marches for peace. It's the same premise. This is big stuff. When you and I then can begin to look at the life, and you hear Mama Lulu, I called her Mama Lulu's voice in my head saying, honor the entirety of your journey. Stop trying to grab at a solution about something from a story or an event or a circumstance that you still carry in the 60,000 thoughts today. Stop pushing away or trying to curate certain things in order to prevent something that's happening. And honor that. Honor every single portal and every gateway that has said, can you come to this one now? Can you come through this now? In Hinduism, they say everything and everyone is the guru. Even the biggest perpetrators of our grief are somehow kind of like the Goliaths. And the part of us that is the David, or the part of us that is willing to stand in front of these egregious things and remember what we are. So remember, if you remember what you are as pure awareness, as the infinite itself, can you begin to imagine then the hands and the feet and the way in which those things bring about significant change? I don't know how else to do it. I honestly don't know how else we can do it. Because at some point, if we don't pivot, if we don't remind ourselves of the infinite capacity of what we have, I know that I would not have lasted this long in doing this work overseas. But it didn't happen overnight. It happens by doing. Each day, I have to decide whether or not I'm just going to rehash the 60,000 thoughts, or I'm going to figure out a way. I'm going to figure out a way to remind myself of my absolute nature. In that same book, Pam Grout said, it's called Priming the Mind. And she said, have you ever noticed when you wanted a new car and it was just like this new idea, and then you went and you saw the car, and then all of a sudden you're driving it, and everywhere you look, that car is everywhere now. She goes, it wasn't that the manufacturers saw that you bought it, so they went overnight and built a whole bunch of new ones. It's that all of a sudden now it's registered in the mind. The mind has been primed for what it was that you were focused on. One of my favorite teachers, Ram Dass, used to tell about how he traveled all over, all the time. And he said people would come up with him and they would say, oh, if I just had your life, I'd be so much more spiritual. If I could go where you go, then I could do these meditations and I could do these things. And then they would list about the fact that I can't do it because of the family and this. And he would say to them, everywhere you look, you see what you're looking for. And they'd say, I live in New York City. It's so noisy. I can't meditate there. I can't do it the way that you do. And he said, everywhere you look, you see what you're looking for. Brene Brown said something similar. She goes, if we are so committed to a story or a narrative, one of those 60,000 thoughts, it's very easy to walk out of our front door and find a whole tribe of people who will agree with us. In metaphysics, we used to say, we are right. That's nice, right? We are right by right of consciousness, by the level by which our self-awareness is operating. So I want to be aware. I want to be aware of being aware. I want to be aware of how much my finite nature might be impeding or veiling over my infinite nature. And I'm not going to find that through my intellect. I'm probably not going to find it in a book. And it's probably going to pique our interest in an atmosphere like this, but it isn't until what? We go and we experiment with that. I couldn't get Ram Dass's little ditty out of my head. Everywhere you look, you see what you're looking for. And because of my love of music and the way in which I practice on a daily basis, repetition, I started to go. And Ram Dass would always conclude, if the only thing is God that you're looking for, then God is what you will see. And so I'm going into the grocery store and I go, everywhere I look, I see what I'm looking for. Everywhere I look, I see. If the only thing is God that I'm looking for, then God is what I see. Try that with me. Everywhere I look, I see what I'm looking for. Everywhere I look, I see. If the only thing is God that I'm looking for, then God is what I see. I'm walking into the airport. I'm going to the counter. There's all these lines. Oh boy, I could use a little grace. Everywhere I look, I see what I'm looking for. Everywhere I look, I see. If the only thing is grace, if the only thing is grace that I'm looking for, then grace is what I see. Then love is what I see. Then God is what I see. Repetition, repetition, repetition. And so it is. Thank you very much.